You probably noticed in his discourse the phrase rot in jail. And like many of you, I guess I had always assumed, and this little Google search shows you that this is what most of us now assume, that rot in jail is a reference to sort of a long sentence, right? So that you would metaphorically rot in jail. But for Howard's day, that was not a metaphor. This frequent effect, jail fever, of confinement in prison seems generally understood and shows how full of emphatical meaning is the curse of the severe creditor who pronounces his debtors doomed to rot in jail. I believe I have learned the full import of this sentence from the vast numbers who, to my certain knowledge, some of them before my eyes, have perished in our jail. So rot in jail. In that era, it didn't mean go to jail for so long that you'll rot. It meant go to jail, die, and rot maybe in the next 6 months, right? It may not be a long time at all. And one of Howard's points, of course, you have to keep in mind, he's writing for the literate readers of England and Europe, and those would not have been random citizens. They would have been the better sorts, we might say. And so one of Howard's points is, gee, if you run jails like this and you get people sick with jail fever, you may die of it too, because you, the educated high elites, judges, lord mayors, aldermen, if you come into contact with the diseases being spread. And keep in mind, this is very important for thinking about how they wanted to imagine new forms of punishment. This is the era of what is often called by historians of science the miasma theory of medicine. That is, this is before germs or microorganisms as we now know them had been discovered yet through looking through microscopes. The assumption about how diseases were caused and spread primarily focused on the influence of decomposing organic matter in the environment, which was assumed to be a terribly toxic kind of effect. And of course, this was a world full of decomposing organic matter because there's animals being slaughtered, and there's no garbage service, there's no recycling service, etc. A lot of organic matter is around people. So there's a lot of concern with this. And if you assume that diseases like smallpox and jail fever is actually a form of yellow fever, I believe, which we now know to be spread by microorganisms, are instead spread by exposure to sort of corrupted circumstances, then the fear is that the jail is the source of contagion par excellence. And when you let these folks out of the jail, even to go to trial or to be hanged, there's this danger of contagion. It's interesting, too, that he drew from his own experience as a prisoner of war. And he goes out of his way to argue that we're beginning, he suggests, to be more humane in our treatment of prisoners of war, and we ought to be the same to prisoners. He says, I'm only desirous of seeing the same humanity shown to our own countrymen. I grant there is a material difference in the circumstances between foreign and domestic prisoners, but there is none in their nature. Debtors and felons, as well as hostile foreigners, are men, and by men they ought to be treated as men. So today we would say they're human beings, and they ought to be treated as such by other human beings. There is a kind of a nascent criminology in Howard, as there was in Beccaria. Crime is a contagion. Hardened offenders can pollute younger, more impressionistic ones. That's a sort of an extension of that miasma theory. If you take a young person and put them into this jail where there's a bunch of corrupted and corrupting older prisoners, they will corrupt them. Environmental factors contribute to crime, not the way we would think of them in terms of bad upbringing, but in terms of direct infection. Idleness causes crime, right? And again, think about the claim that the whole public execution scaffold ritual was a big encouragement to idleness, a day of drinking, a good day out, not a day of work. And of course, like Beccaria, a great belief that the certainty of punishment is more important than its severity if you're going to deter. Now, think about the circumstances of these jails, right? As imagined and witnessed by Howard. Not only are they dangerous places for disease, not only are they immoral places because they mix men and women, people of all ages and circumstances, families with non-families, etc. But they're also, in some ways, a libertine space, right? Especially if you have some money. Being in jail is, in the 18th century, pretty much the equivalent of being sentenced to spend your time in a tavern. A permanent tavern from which you never go home. The jailkeeper is essentially the barkeeper, and they did have alcohol on the premises, which they would serve you if you had the money, and they could get good food for you from down the block, and they could get women for you. They could get anything for you, and they, of course, got a piece of that action. On the other hand, if you were poor, you would be totally dependent on your family to come bring some food or some money to you, and of course the jailer would collect some of that as well. Right? So it could either be heaven or hell, depending on your tastes, and of course depending on your circumstances. But whatever it was, it certainly was not an image of security, orderliness, law-abidingness, control, of the sort that, in their own ways, Beccaria and Howard each were invoking. And if you think about it, think about this debate going on outside in the 18th century about whether or not to have the death penalty and whether or not to get rid of it. On the table as the presumptive alternative to the death penalty is what? Jail, right? That is there are other corporal punishments, but the main other punishment that seems to be around is jail. And when people like Beccaria say, well, you don't need the death penalty, you could have life in prison, to many of his interlocutors, that means life in the tavern. Now, again, that may be somebody's idea of hell, but it doesn't necessarily strike everybody as being punitive enough. It doesn't strike people as having a deterrent effect. And indeed, it might, if we view this from the miasma theory. We're taking a swamp, and that's already this size, and because we're not going to execute people anymore, it's going to become, and we're going to keep them there forever, for a long time, it's going to become this big. And so the corrupting effect on our community is going to be terrible. Now, again, I want to draw a parallel to the moment we are at today. We're looking around at mass incarceration, many of us, and saying, we can't do this anymore. It's a dysfunctional kind of punishment. It's hurting our society. It's not promoting the values that we stand for. It's not producing the right effects. But when we look around and say, well, what else is there? Well, jail. Ironically, right? Realignment for the moment looks like it's saying, well, let's just put people in jail and see what happens to them. And while jails are not this scene exactly anymore, we'll look more at what jails are like. I would put it to you that just as in Howard's time, the question of what to do about the death penalty was quickly tied up with the question of how can we reinvent punishment. The question for us of how to replace mass incarceration is very much tied up with our ability to imagine beyond the current penal forms we have. But of course, we can't just imagine in the blank. We need to work from what's in our environment. So let's think about what was in the environment for the people at the end of the 18th century. What were the available possibilities that were out there? One of them is transportation. And this was actually being practiced already in England at the time we're talking about. In fact, many people who came to the United States from England came as convicts who were transported. And it was a very nifty substitute penalty for hanging, if you think about it. Transportation tended to be the alternative to if you were pardoned by the royal prerogative of pardon, you would get essentially a one-way ticket to America or later Australia. And of course, it was a very nice punishment in all kinds of ways from the point of view of the state. Because just as with hanging, we eliminate you completely from the body politic, right? We don't have to worry about you anymore. We vote you off the island. And in this case, you really are off the island. Even though you're not dead, you're in Australia or America, and you might as well be dead. And because people don't know what Australia is yet or what America is yet, it has a lot of deterrent power, right? Do you want to be pulled out of your community in South London and dumped somewhere, 5,000 or 6,000 miles away? Probably not. Not to mention the terror of getting there across an ocean. So transportation was one possibility, and it remains one of the most interesting penal mechanisms. As you can imagine, the real problem with transportation is you need to have an Australia, right? You need to have a virtually empty place where you can offload your prisoners. And if it's like Australia, then they can actually become fairly prosperous with the right materials, etc. Another significant model that I think most historians agree had a big influence on the future direction of the prison was the workhouse. These by and large were not designed for criminals. They were essentially a form of welfare. So if you were indigent or if you were a vagrant, you might be arrested. But rather than being charged and convicted with a crime, you might just be taken to the workhouse. Here these people are working on cranks. They're turning a crank. Actually didn't do anything, didn't produce anything of value, but it worked you, and it made you feel tired, and presumably taught you the discipline of hard work. The Dutch and the European continent was really ahead of England on this. One of the, again, I apologize for the distortion of blowing up these slides so much, but this is the Amsterdam Spinhuis, which was where indigent women, vagrant women were kept. As you can see, it's a big kind of spinning factory. The men worked in what was called the Amsterdam Rashuis, where they would literally rasp, they would take wood, big logs, and they would rasp it into sawdust, which was a valuable commodity for various kinds of industrial production in that era. So that was one very powerful model is this workhouse model, which by and large was not being used on criminals, particularly in this period. Another idea that was very actually popular in the American colonies were the idea of what were called wheelbarrow men, or the wheelbarrow law. And this was a form of public outdoor penal servitude. The basic idea is that you would have criminal offenders, prisoners, if you will, they might spend the night in jail, but then during the day they would walk around the streets of Philadelphia with their wheelbarrow, and when they saw a pile of horse crap, they would put it in a wheelbarrow, or they saw a pothole, they would fill it in, etc. The benefits obviously are that you would, remember Beccaria, you would see punishment happening all around you. It would be a kind of daily routine as you walk to work. You'd see the people working with wheelbarrows, etc. But it had its problems as well, right? Because these might be little feeders of order and obedience, but they could also be little knots of trouble. What if the people coming to talk to the wheelbarrow, look at the wheelbarrow men, were the wheelbarrow men's old mates from the pub? What if they hand them a flagon of wine? What if they start talking and partying rather than working? This becomes a disruption rather than a lesson in obedience and discipline, right? So it's an idea that looks very promising. That's what it was supposed to look like when you see the wheelbarrow men about. Now, the idea that I think gained the most strength, and it leads fairly directly to the penitentiary model that we will study on Thursday, is the idea of a new kind of jail, a reformed jail. In place of the kind of tavern with a lock on the door, which was essentially the 18th century English jail, this would be a bit more like a monastery with cells. The Walnut Street Jail, which was the first reformed jail built in the American colonies. That's a view of it going up. Here's another view of it once it was up. Pretty substantial building. Originally, they built big cells in which about 18 prisoners would be held. A decade or so later, beginning of the 19th century, they remodeled it to actually have individual cells. So you're moving toward a more segmented, more controlled space. But still, the idea that the punishment is going to be involved is essentially one of confinement, but now not one of chaos and libertinism, but a kind of controlled and disciplined space. So this gives you more or less the range. Obviously, there were lots of other penalties around, including the various forms of corporal punishment we talked about, but they fell into the same disrepute, by and large, that the death penalty did for some of the same reasons. And so the goal was to find penalties that would deliver deterrence, provide the kind of sense of moral satisfaction that executions were intended to, but not fall into the kind of various pathologies that might actually encourage crime that both Beccaria and Howard had pointed to. As we will see on Thursday, the prison, the penitentiary prison that arose, one of the first being in Philadelphia, right around this time, that Eastern State Penitentiary, the one that Charles Dickens visited for the reading I've given you for Thursday. Also a prison at New York, the Auburn prison. Similar prisons were being built in Europe. These prisons, as you'll see when we talk on Thursday, connect directly Howard and Beccaria's time to our time. That is, when we think about a prison, we're still thinking about that cellular, ventilated, kind of potentially hygienic space that was very much the solution of the 18th century. And it's interesting that here we are, more than 200 years later, and that still remains very close to our own conception. Okay, that's it for now. We will take up the question of the penitentiary as it developed next on Thursday.